We are going to get started promptly at the top of the hour, but we'll give everyone a chance to enter in. And for those who are here already, you're part of a lucky group because we had such outstanding interest for today's topic that we're actually over my webinar limit. So for those who aren't able to join in our Zoom session, they're going to be told to go over to YouTube where we're having a live stream. So if you happen to leave early and want to rejoin later, you might end up being on the YouTube stream, just a small warning, but you'll get to see it regardless. I'm seeing a few familiar names from some other free sessions and classes. Welcome to you all. Thank you for coming today. Yes, Kimberly, there will be a recording available. We are in fact recording as I speak. It's going to be available on YouTube immediately afterward. I'm going to go ahead and prepare to get things underway, share the slides that I have available, and we'll be getting started in just another moment. All right. It is the top of the hour, so I am going to get us underway. Welcome, everyone, to How Does Literary Talent Get Discovered Today? I am here today to discuss this topic with Ann Kjellberg. We have a lot of fun, encouraging information to share, I think, but I'm sure there will be some sobering information as well. There's always a little of both in sessions like this. For those of you who might be new to these free sessions that I offer, I just want to confirm that it's recorded. You're going to be able to find that recording on my YouTube channel. If you want to ask a question, we will have some Q&A at the end. I ask that you put that into the Q&A box, which is separate from the chat. If you put it into the chat, it's going to stream on by and we will likely never see it. So use the Q&A box for any questions that you would like to hear me and Ann address. We won't get to them all, but we'll do our best to answer the top voted questions. You can upvote questions that you want to hear answered live. The chat is there for you to interact with other people who are attending today. Mark Griffin, as always, is on today's session. If you have any technical trouble, please reach out to him in the chat. He's happy to assist you. There's closed captioning for the class. Just look for the closed caption icon. There's also a transcript that you can have running in the background if you wish. That's hiding under the closed caption icon. So take a look for that if you're interested in it. Okay, before we get underway, I would like to thank my sponsor for these free sessions as well as my free newsletter, Electric Speed. That sponsor is Kingsman Editing for the month of January. Kingsman Editing offers editing to all types of authors. And if you're curious about their services, just go to kingsmanediting.com and let them know you found them through Jane Friedman and her newsletter or her free classes. So allow me to introduce Ann. I have known Ann for quite a number of years now in the industry. She, for at least as long as I've known her, she has been heavily involved in the literary community. She runs a literary journal. She used to be at the New York Review of Books. As of today, I mostly read and interact with her through the publication she has called Book Post, which I would consider like a very serious review outlet, as well as publishing and literary commentary on a range of issues. I do highly recommend it. If for those of you who subscribe to my paid newsletter, you've probably seen me reference Book Post articles a number of times because of her own publishing commentary. And another reason I really like having Ann in on this conversation is that she and I have different perspectives on the industry. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. So we have different backgrounds and insights to bring to the table. So before I, dive in to the topic, Anne, is there anything else you want to say or add about your background and uh, how you how you come to this topic? And you'll have to unmute. There you are.
I just want to say that I'm really grateful to be here and that I've always found your newsletter so captivating. Oh, I thought I was unmuted.
Oh, you are.
Do I
You,
sound muted?
no, you're all good.
No, am I freezing up?
All good so far.
I love Jane's newsletter so much. And, the level of kind of data, of investigation, of study, I really haven't found anywhere else. So it's been extremely illuminating for me. So I guess I've experienced our disagreements less intensely because I'm so full of admiration. I'm not even sure how many we have, but they will come to. I
Uh,
did also worked at it was many years ago. I worked at Farrar Straus and Giroux as an editor in the first years of my career, so I have some experience of that side of things.
yeah, yeah. All right. So one of the sparks for this session was actually something that both Anne and I wrote about last year. It concerns the blacklist. And for those who don't know what this is, it's been around for quite some time. It's a site and a contest and a repository of scripts, that are seeking directors, producers, seeking, to go and be made, films that want to be made. And last year they opened up to book authors. So, you can see here the New York Times covered it with the headline, the Blacklist helped reshape Hollywood. Can it change publishing? And the subtitle or the deck there says almost 20 years after Franklin Leonard created the Blacklist, which has helped little known screenwriters break into Hollywood, it is expanding into fiction. And Anne, I feel like the two of us might have been we were one of some of the few people to express skepticism about this as an opportunity. I didn't do a full on report on it. I just kind of more mentioned it. This is happening. Please, I might be a little bit cautious about investing your money in this. Not that it's a scam. It is not a scam. It's a legit uh, service and company with I would consider good intentions. But Anne, do you want to talk about what you because you brought such history and context to it? So I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you saw this.
Well, when I saw it, I became really curious about what the context was for this and whether there had been other uh, enterprises like this before. And when I came up with first, I felt as though the reporting on it was deceptive because it didn't adequately distinguish between the success of the blacklist, which is this list that Franklin Leonard compiled of unproduced screenplays. So he had this list of screenplays that were admired by people in the industry, but they didn't think they would be able to bring them to fruition. And this showed this kind of blockage in movie production where there was a lot of good material, but there were kind of all these constraints, which I think are different from the constraints in publishing, preventing these things from coming forward. So that list itself, there were movies produced off that list, and it kind of showed an inability to recognize or generate talent that, the list did something to redress. And he tried to kind of build on that by creating this platform that would allow screenwriters to kind of load their lists up, their screenplays up, and get direct exposure to people who are developing films. But there was much less information about how well this secondary thing worked. I mean, the original blacklist had all this vetting by professionals who were disclosing their honest opinion about stuff that they had been reading for work. And the platform, on the other hand, was a for hire system in which I can't remember, I'm pretty sure that it works the same way and that they described it for fiction and for
Yeah.
screenplays, where you're paying for these readings, and the more readings you pay for, the more likely they are to kind of elevate you um, in the it it's not an algorithm, but the more
Yeah.
visible you become to the agents and book publishers who are supposedly looking at this thing. So really, it's just different people that you're hiring to do that original reading. In a book publisher, it's junior staff, or at a, really unagented, but at an agency, it's very junior staff who are doing an initial reading. And here it's some kind of gig working
Mhm.
reader, very likely a similar person. And uh, the fact that you need to continue to pay for more of these things in order to be elevated creates a weird business model to me. They don't benefit from your success. They only benefit from your sticking around and kicking in more money. So there were a lot of things about it that I felt deserved more attention than they got in this kind of fawning times
Yes.
of treatment.
Yes, it was very fawning. It's like no one wanted to say anything negative about it. And I don't know why. Maybe Franklin Leonard wields some influence and power, and no one's like, I don't want to upset this fellow. Um, or it
I,
just has a good reputation generally. I don't know because
I
I
think
don't,
they're
I haven't met
looking
him.
for everyone's very sensitive to the charge that the system is elitist. So
Mhm.
there's this kind of uh, goodwill that gets extended toward people who are trying to shake that up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's
I,
true.
I did look around, I found that someone had tried something like this 20 years ago and it had disappeared. And that agents for a while, some of them were doing paid readings for people, which is
Right.
basically kind of a comparable thing. And the agent world had decided that that was unethical and had kind of uh, put out a rule against it. So
Right. So it all kind of raises this question of how writers get discovered, the topic of this of today's conversation. And I mean, for me, when I saw it, I'm like, this isn't going to change how anyone gets discovered. I've seen efforts like this in various, with, let's say, people paying to get read by agents or important people, some better than others. And I've never seen it pan out. So, and I certainly see the ways that people do get discovered ultimately, and it's just hasn't been through one of these services. So this kind of brings me to a question that has become more and more and more prominent over time. I'm seeing more articles about it, more anxiety about it, more insistence around it, which is if you do want to get discovered as, let's say, a first time novelist, or maybe, your first book didn't do so well and you're trying to get discovered again. There's this question of, do you now today need a platform to get a novel deal? And my answer, my personal answer, my own insistence has always been no. You do not need to have a platform to get a deal for at least your debut novel. Now it's very different for nonfiction. I think most people would agree you do need some kind of platform for an agent or for a big New York publishing deal. And I have to say, platform's a tortured word. People talk about it in different ways. But when I say platform, I mean visibility, like visibility to your book's intended readership. So that happens in a lot of ways. It's not just about social media numbers, it can be through relationships and your networks and the fact that you know Oprah and can reach her on speed dial. Um, but like there's so many articles that have coming out, and I'd love to get your take on this, Anne, because I think you noticed this too. Like there was a Vox article last year about everyone's a sellout now, and basically painting this picture of how you have to be on TikTok in order to sell a book, which I don't think is true, which caused me to write an article saying author platform is not a requirement to sell your novel. And then you have other people on Substack saying, well, actually, do novelists need platforms? There was a recent article that was excellent, I might add, by a publicist, Cassie Mans Murray, saying publicity first, agent second. Not necessarily saying you need a platform, but you need to think about how will you market this book once it's out in the world, and platform considerations absolutely come into play there. And then Kathleen Schmidt, another publicist, has been writing frequently on this issue. Do you need to build a platform? Yes and no. And so there's like this growing confusion, which even for me, about where are we at on this, in fact. And maybe this is where you butt in and offer your
Yeah, well,
own.
I think the first thing to say is that you now certainly hear among editors and agents that they've been burned. There was a kind of gold rush mentality around platforms, and a lot of big deals were made based on somebody's, huge following on Instagram or something. And they have now completely learned that if someone with a giant following is not necessarily going to be able to sell a book.
Yeah.
And the thing that's effective about the TikTok thing is that it's really recommendations from other people. It's a way of kind of supercharging that recommendation element that's always the word of mouth thing
Yeah.
that's always been considered the most kind of potent form of book selling. So I think that the idea that you need to everybody has now fully, I think, rejected the idea that a big platform translates into sales. On the other hand, if you're a person who has really lived completely outside of connection to electronic media, it's publishers and agents are going to realize that it's going to be harder to put you across, and you have to make more of a case for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most writers now exist in some sort of community where there are people who know who they are and they share things somehow with their audience and with their peers, and that's part of how, when you get a book deal, you put down the name of your hometown
Mm-hmm.
because they want to know, where are your connections? Where do you have a human touch out there?
Yeah, I want to go back to your earlier point about the word of mouth driving book sales. Like, obviously, something has to get the ball rolling, but I almost feel like it's, dare I say, old fashioned, to position that as a critical factor in like having a very successful book. I don't mean just like a few thousand copies. I mean like tens of thousands of copies. It can't just be you yelling on TikTok. Like, it has to be the readers recommending the book to other readers, not the author shouting from the rooftops. At least, and I hear I'm kind of limiting my comment to fiction. Nonfiction's a little different, but I do still kind of, but I'm starting to feel old fashioned in my view that word of mouth, book recommendations, reader recommendations is what really drives ultimate success. I don't know. Do you feel
Like
that way? You,
recommendation element is kind of the secret sauce of the power of social media in book sales. That
yeah,
you can just speak more loudly as a person who cares about something than you used to be able to, and that's been, I think, very meaningful. Um, I think what you hear a lot when you talk to editors about the book selling environment is that on their end, the sales are so overwhelmed by Amazon that
yeah,
the hand sales in independent bookstores are, an almost negligible feature of their calculation. And so for the purposes of these big sales and big boxes and stuff, big box stores, um, eh, uh, there has to be a factor that is the discovery is their big challenge, that these sales are not being made by people who are looking deeply into the book or people who have some have heard about it for more than 3 seconds.
yeah,
So they're really trying to figure out how you you get that kind of energy going so that the book is seen and heard about by people who are not seeking it out.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So this brings me to the more researched part of this presentation. And some of you may know me for this type of research that I've published in the past, where I essentially dive into publishers' marketplace deals. For those who aren't familiar with this site, it has been cataloging publishing deals going back to the year 2000. Now, it's a self-reporting system, so that means that agents and publishers uh, they voluntarily report what their deals are and then they get logged. It's not Publishers Marketplace trying to do that for every single publisher out there. So it is not a full accounting of every book deal that happens. But obviously, now that it's been going on for about 25 years, it has some valuable reference points and data, and lots of people use it as signs of trends in the market. Um, so something that I did very recently, uh, this was during this time frame in 2024, is about a 6 month time frame. I looked at every single debut novel deal that was logged, to see and research the author to see where do they come from? What seems to be a factor in the fact they got a book deal? And some of this is subjective, and I didn't like call up every author. I didn't. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of book deals, but these are sort of the common threads that I saw running through the authors' backgrounds. There were people who were super active in the literary or university committee, like professors, MFA degree holders, that sort of thing. People who were journalists, people in entertainment fields, people inside publishing itself, who work at these houses or literary journals. There were some self-publishing authors making rights deals or moving over to traditional, and then there was a small sliver of people I would consider your influencer, like the TikTok influencer or so on. We're going to talk more about that, so hold on to it. I also did this for memoir deals with a slightly different set of threads running through it. So there were memoir deals for celebrities, memoir deals that built on current events. Think about politics, for example. People with a notable platform, people with a media angle or media connections, like New York Times journalists, former CNN anchors, that sort of thing. Established writers who had other books, people who were novelists now writing a memoir. And then you have this all others group, which is kind of like, it's not clear to me why they got a memoir deal, other than they must have written a really terrific book, or they had this very unusual thing that happened to them, and they're now going to write about it. Now, I haven't done this exercise for nonfiction deals because I think all of the authors, like probably 80 to 90% of the authors would have some kind of a notable platform. They would already be experts or authorities in their field. I remember doing some research for a particular author to find her comps, and her comps were like a Nobel Prize winner, a Harvard University economics professor, so you find people that have like, okay, I understand exactly why they got a book deal. It's not a mystery. So I want to dig more into these categories that I just mentioned and go into some of the examples to help folks see kind of the trajectory of writers at the like when they're emerging. I don't think it matters really how old they are. In my opinion, I think we're going to see a range of ages here. But I'm going to start with the literary and university community because I think it tends to have the lion's share of debut fiction deals. And the examples that you're seeing here are all fairly recent. Most of them are within the last half year. For some of these categories, I had to reach back a little bit further, but I would still categorize them as recent. So we've got Mark Hitz, The Name of the Dog. What I found for him is that he's an MFA grad, a Stegner Fellow at his MFA program. He had published some work in Glimmer Train, which is a now defunct literary journal, highly reputable, celebrated. And when I went to Google him, so the process I followed is I found the book deal, and then I went to Google the author, and all I could really find on him was his Glimmer Train little piece he wrote about his writing. Like, I couldn't find a website. If he has a social media presence, it wasn't clear he was active, or if it was even him to begin with. So I find this exceptionally common. And that's, anyone that I put into the literary or university bucket is someone like Mark Hitz. And their online presence tends to be pretty sparse, but they have some publication record that you can see, like in Glimmer Train. And so I think it's pretty clear to me that one of the paths to being taken seriously, to getting agent or editor attention, is to have some sort of presence in this community, whether it's through an MFA program or some sort of fellowship or grant, or the literary journal publishing credits, contests and awards. And I have a few resources here for people who think this, kind of describes the type of author they are. There's Lit Mag News on Substack, which is an excellent resource. There's Literistic, which is a paid subscription service to learn about opportunities like the contests and awards and so on. And then, of course, AWP, the big conference and organization for the literary community. And I'm going to pause here because I've been prattling on for a bit here, but I feel like your background is strongly in this community. And I still feel like if you're a strong writer in this community, you can get a book deal. I'm not saying you're going to get a big advance, but
Well, and one thing that I was when I was thinking about the Franklin Leonard project, it was concerning to me that an expensive MFA program should have to be a
mm,
threshold
yeah.
to being a published writer. So I tried to kind of push a little bit with agents and editors I know, and they all insisted that you don't have to go to Columbia or something, that you can
Mhm.
do, if you look into writers circles in your community, or I actually don't know how much these different things cost. Like it can be bread loaf, or it can be
Yeah.
something that you pay for a summer or for a few months, or if you have a writers group, that like a really important feature is this referrals feature,
Mhm.
because they have so much to wade through. And if they just hear from one other person that you stand out or you're a talented
Right.
writer, then that's really enough to lift you, just enough to be read. So
Right.
if you're in any sort of community where you're bumping up against other writers, or anybody who could talk about you or appreciate you, that gives you a lift.
Yeah, absolutely. To show another example, kind of in this vein, I'm often asked, and about what are the best contests and competitions or awards to enter, and it always makes me a little bit queasy because so many of them charge an entry fee, and you enter a few, and suddenly it's hundreds of dollars that you're spending, and of course it's all very competitive. But for one example, this is, I believe, a UK based author who won the BBC National Short Story Award. And while he was actually a finalist, he didn't win the award. But sometimes those awards can give you that little lift if you're not in the MFA community or you don't have those relationships. But I have to say, as someone who worked at Writers Digest for the competitions division. Well, I didn't work for the competitions division, but I oversaw it and was responsible for helping the winners with their marketing and promotion and introducing them to agents. Like, we're talking about one person who gets the visibility out of like 30,000. And of course the competition was a profit center for the brand. It earned, at the time I was there, it was earning like almost $1 million a year in profits. So you always have to be really cautious, I think, with the contests and awards, because they can be a way, not a nefarious way, but it can be a way for journals and some publishing programs just to make sure they can meet their bills by running the competition.
That would be my instinct, that it would be a really moonshotty thing to be devoting a lot of your energies to.
Yeah.
Like, it adds to your definitely adds something to your resume, but it seems like there are ways to do that that might give you more bang for the buck.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to do your research and see what did these winners go on to achieve. Um, if this award winner that I have shown here, I don't know if the award played into him getting that deal, but if it did, that would obviously be a great contest to give a try. Okay, so moving on to the next category, the journalist and media community. I found Hannah Seelinger's Valley of the Moms. She's a journalist. She actually has a memoir too, so it's not her first book, and she's also a New York Times contributor. And so I find that journalists and people in the media just generally have more relationships and connections than your average person. They know someone who knows an editor or has an agent, and it's not that you don't have to have a good book, but they just have a little bit easier time of it. Um, so this, to me, this always raises the question: well, which if you're going to try, if you're not a journalist but you are like publishing articles, if you're doing some freelance work, if you're placing personal essay, what are the outlets that actually matter? And that's a really hard question to answer, but one of the places I tend to send people, and Anne, I'm curious to know what you would think of this, if you have any resources for what are the media outlets that matter. But there's an aggregator called Media Gazer that just puts together all of the headlines related to media, and it's updated like, I don't know, every 5 minutes. And it gives you a sense of of which publications actually get traffic, actually get attention. And so I'm not suggesting it as a way to get your news because you would go a little nuts.
Yeah.
Um, but just to see what publications are visible so you know if your own piece published in that outlet might have a chance at visibility.
I read an essay that I think I went to because of you, and now I can't remember who did it, but maybe it's going to be obvious to you about it was about writers placing editorials and stuff in connection with the publication of their book. And, do you want to do excerpts or do you want to do kind of related things? And a lot of the places they were placing things were things that I really hadn't heard of. And I
Oh,
thought like, there is a universe of the agents know of, um, outlets that are read by, specific constituencies who are likely book buyers. And it was a surprise to me. So I think that maybe some reading around um, just within these author circles around about where they're placing things in
yeah,
connection with their books might be illuminating. It's this is definitely because I'm also a person publishing a newsletter, a world that is in such flux.
it
Everything
is.
struggling to survive and struggling to find audience and is changing all the time.
Yeah. I like your tip about looking at what some other authors are doing in terms of placement to promote themselves or their books because I think it's you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can see what other people are doing and if it's had some success for them. If you saw the article, then probably it means something. There was a really funny essay over the Christmas holiday meeting. I think some people might have missed it by journalist Hamilton Nolan. He's been in the journalism media community for many years. And he just had a book come out, a serious nonfiction book. And I do recommend the piece he wrote. I want to say it was in The Guardian. And he talks about how as a young man, I regarded the book publishing industry as an unapproachable bastion of erudite literary sophisticates. I was relieved of this notion during the years that I wrote for a popular blog and regularly received solicitations from agents and editors encouraging me to turn my latest viral blog post into a book. Though flattered, I was always struck with skepticism at their enthusiasm. Really, I would wonder. You think that 10 best breakfast sandwich breads ranked could be a good book? This is how I learned that many people in the publishing industry spend their days browsing the internet in boredom, like every other office worker. But I am that office worker. I used to be at least that office worker. Like in the mid 2000s when blogging was huge, I absolutely was trolling all of the popular websites, blogs, whatever, to find books that we can publish. And we published at least a dozen titles that were pulled right off blogs. I guess today it's probably, I don't know, TikTok or Substack or podcasts, which we'll talk about. But yeah, editors are totally looking for talent that way.
Mhm.
And if you've already gotten the attention or if it shows that you have a platform, it makes it all the easier.
Yeah, well, I don't, there was a moment where in blogging where you really could get a large platform from you could go from 0 to 60 pretty fast. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of talk on Substack about how possible that is.
right.
Substack really rewards existing uh, celebrity.
It does.
And yeah, I would be interested. I would love to meet an agent who gets a lot of books that from stuff they're reading online and find out where they're reading those. I don't think it's quite as fertile as it was in the days when you were doing it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, so the next category, people involved in TV, film, stage, or entertainment. And I imagine most people attending today or watching this video are probably not in the TV or film industry. Maybe you're in an adjacent industry to book publishing, which I think is always helpful, like marketing or publicity. But you will find that people like Kim Samek, an Emmy Award nominated writer and an exec producer, they will get book deals, both fiction and nonfiction. And I do think it kind of begs the question of whether or not some writers, if they want to be visible, should they do something with the work in non-book format to attract attention? Like I get a lot of people asking me, should I turn my novel into a screenplay and try to get an agent or try to get interest in the screenplay, which I think, well, good luck with that. I find Hollywood a far more challenging place to get attention than book publishing. But there was an article recently that I published at my site by Elizabeth Renecki about how she was able to take a book idea. This would have been her second book. If it does come out as a book, it will be her second. And it got turned into a podcast. And she, in her article, she discusses, how actually that was a very satisfying thing to do, and it made her think about the story in a different way. It ended up not looking like the book, like it developed a different sort of narrative thread by turning it into a podcast. And certainly, I've seen some fiction writers use podcasting as a way to draw attention to their work. Do you have any take on
Yeah, I
this?
mean, podcasting too has very like severe problems of discovery. There's no
Mm-hmm.
obvious way to make your podcast visible, and that there have been kind of slumps and spikes in the podcast world about this problem. But one thing I see a lot on Substack, and um, there are probably analogous things going on in other platforms, is that there is a lot of pressure and energy around doing different kind of video and audio features around writing. And so I think even short of creating a whole podcast in place of your project, there people do seem to get benefit from, doing some sort of Q&A about a thing that interests you. And it's still very hypothetical. Like I still have a lot of skepticism coming from the pivot to video moment on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook when everybody was so encouraged to become visual instead of a written medium. And I kind of wonder if Substack is pushing the same button, but it is what they talk about in there a lot around growth is using these different video and audio formats kind of in ways that weave in with your writing or that complement it.
Yeah. I know certainly poets have taken really great advantage of Instagram and TikTok for sharing and publishing their poetry. Shelby Lee is a poet who used TikTok in particular. This has been some years ago when she kind of achieved liftoff. She didn't even show herself. She was just reading the poems. They were on the topic of mental health, I believe, and so she was targeting a mental health audience more so than a poetry audience, and she ended up getting picked up by a traditional publisher. Um, and I've also seen, of course, before TikTok, there was people doing that on Instagram and the Insta poets. Um, so there's certainly something there, but it does require you to be able to be engaging in those, obviously, on those in those different mediums. And I know some people are for them it's really a non-starter. Um,
Yeah, this is something I was thinking about back in when you were talking about platforms, another little direction we could have taken there. Like something I really have learned a lot about from you is that in the world of genre self-publishing, especially, there's this sense, this whole kind of profession or métier of audience building, and how you have this built-in audience, especially if you write really quickly and you write a lot of books, so people are waiting for your next one, and you're doing stuff with them and you're giving them special benefits if they kind of belong to your insider thing, and you can kind of show them advanced pieces of your book and or blog with them, or have like a tea party with them on Valentine's Day and stuff. And these things can happen in visual kind of live stream formats, or you can make videos and stuff. you know that kind of thing has been super successful for some people working within self-publishing, and it's something that for other people would be a huge time wasting distraction and they would do them no good at all. If it's if it complements your work and you feel drawn into it, there's a lot of mileage there, but it's extremely, I personally am very, very challenged about. To me, it would be a whole nother profession to
yeah,
find material to support my work.
yeah. Not everyone is charismatic as John Green on
Mhm.
video, and I, for his brother, it was his profession for many years. I believe, like they did the YouTube creator conference. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah, well, one other little piece of that too is just that in journalism, where writers are increasingly kind of called upon to create their own audiences. I mean, there's kind of a similar thing, like
Mhm.
how much of an audience do you bring with you when you arrive at an outlet? Um, you know, this catchword comes up all the time. Cultivate your own audience. How do you do that?
Yeah,
And do you have to depart too much from the craft of writing itself to do
right.
these kind of non-writing projects? It's
Yeah.
an open question.
All right. So the next category includes those who are already working in some capacity in the publishing industry. So they might be an editor, could be an agent. I've seen agents publish books, freelancers for the publishing houses, marketers and publicists. I mean, the list is a long one. There's lots of ways that people interface with publishing. The most recent deal I saw to this effect was Brody Crellin's A Sense of Occasion, editor for Granta. For those who don't know that, it's a very prestigious literary journal. And I can't sincerely recommend that people start working in publishing in order to get their book published. From personally, I did end up in the publishing industry with, the creative writing degree, thinking I was going to write books, and my work in publishing only dampened my enthusiasm to continue writing. It was only when I left that I actually wanted to write again. So, but for those who are just interested and curious and want to try that, I'll just mention that the two biggest job boards are at Publishers Weekly and at Publishers Lunch. But I don't think this is like, this is the yellow brick road to getting a book deal. It's still very hard, but I do think for better and for worse. I think it brings to light some how the sausage gets made, where you're at in the marketplace, what sort of things get submitted. I mean, some advice that's often given to writing students is try to get exposed to slush piles anywhere. Try to be a reader for a contest so that you can get a sense of what everyone seems to be doing, because so many of the submissions look alike, feel alike. And so that just makes those unique voices stand out all the more. And it's just hard to understand that until you see the great mass, the slush pile.
Mhm.
Um, and do you
Especially
accept
the
submission?
feature of
Oh,
needing to grab people out of the gate. Like there's this, people are always saying, you didn't, did you read my whole book before you rejected it? No, I'm afraid you have to convince me, as you would any reader, to keep going. Um,
yeah,
and what it takes to pull someone in.
yeah,
Yeah, I was told to get a job. I was encouraged to get a job at a bookstore when I was looking for work in publishing, for a kind of analogous reasons, like that many people in publishing just don't really have any idea what it's like to try to actually sell a book. I think and being participating in any layer of this whole ecosystem
yeah,
gives you a little bit of insight
yeah.
into uh, what tempers one's idealism or romanticism about how it all.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
I mean, it's very hard to find work in publishing now too.
it
And
is.
it's probably illuminating, easier to find work outside of editorial, and equally, and maybe promotions and enlightening if you'd like
Yeah,
to get a job.
yeah. Next category is self-publishing authors. So the as for those of you who read my paid newsletter or saw my 2024 recap, you'll know that I've been following very closely how there's been an increase in partnerships between traditional publishers and self-publishing authors. And so, in some sense, they're rights deals. So the author continues publishing their own work in certain formats, and then they partner with that house for basically retail distribution, marketing, and promotion support. And it's truly a collaboration where the publisher does not have veto power. They're not calling the shots. The author is the one who has control over the project, which is why I tend to call it more of a kind of a partnership or a rights deal. It's not like they're signing a traditional contract. Obviously, to fall into this category, you generally already need to have some level of astounding success, like bestseller success. So Callie Hart in this example is already a USA Today bestseller. I checked her Amazon author page, already has 74 books total. She's not emerging by any stretch, but maybe, she's emerging in the bookstore market or in the library market. I don't know. I didn't research that far, but that's the that's the trend that I see. That's the pattern that I see. And because this area interests me so much, I have started publishing these bestseller lists that just focus on self-published books. And so I do one, these are free to everyone, by the way, and they're at the hotsheetpub.com website. I have a list just for ebooks, and then I have a list for print books. And the reason is because the ebooks, it's almost entirely fiction dominated by romance or romantasy. And if you look at the print side, it is entirely dominated by nonfiction, which is, I think, continues to fascinate me how ebooks have become the realm of genre fiction and people still prefer their print for nonfiction at the moment, anyway. So if you want to get a sense of who's succeeding out there in the self-published space, and many of these authors already have agents, they have traditional deals, but they continue to self-publish. You can take a look at what's happening in that market. Again, that's at hotsheetpub.com. There have been increasingly mainstream media attention on this sort of phenomenon. So when Keela Shaheen's The Shadow Work Journal got a traditional publishing deal, there was a profile of her. This was with Simon and Schuster, and she got an ungodly sum. Was it seven figures? It was a lot of money. To republish that book and then do what I imagine are a number of follow-ons. And, she was totally unknown prior to doing this book. And it took off because of TikTok. And then I also did a profile of a cookbook author, Matthew Bounds, who is primarily a TikTok personality. And as soon as his book hit the self-published bestseller list, it's of course, people are seeing that the publishing industry people are seeing those sales tally on BookScan. And so they see this person they've never known, a self-published author, getting all these sales on BookScan. And of course, they're going straight to him and saying, would you like us to offload that burden? We'll handle it for you. And in some sense, there can be a burden here because the counterfeit and copycat market on Amazon is out of control. So when I interviewed him for my piece, he was battling a really serious counterfeit problem, and it is not fun. And then finally, Frida McFadden is one of the best-selling authors of the last few years, and she's partnered with Sourcebooks, as have so many other self-published authors, to do retail distribution. And that's a really great profile to read too. So, and thoughts?
Yeah, the big question to me is, I mean, we talked about this quotation from Jonathan Karp of Simon and Schuster
Oh,
about
yeah.
like, oh, it's next coming up. Am I jumping ahead, or were you about to
No,
get?
no, you go right ahead. Yeah.
Um, that just a couple of years ago, these bigwigs at the Big Five were so dismissive of self-publishing and treated it as some kind of swamp of, what we used to call vanity presses, and now he's saying this mysterious thing. And it does make me wonder if there's some kind of future in which people could be selling more modestly, like that they could be watching numbers where people could have a growing audience that's not in the mega gazillions, and that would kind of set you up for a future deal. I mean, in the past, it was absolutely necessary to get a book contract that it be original work. It was extremely rare that they would ever republish something that had already been published by someone else. But I don't know. Do you think that it's heading? I mean, is there a middle distance between smash hit mega seller self-publishing thing that's taken over by a mainstream press and
I think I think that's fascinating that you've pointed out. If publishers were paying maybe just a little bit more calculated attention, they would be skimming off more people before they even became as big as they are. And I know there is one publisher for sure that does that. It's called Podium, and they were established quite some time ago. It's been at least 10 years, if not 15 or 20. And they started off doing audiobooks for self-published authors, and they were just studying the numbers, who's doing well in ebook or who's doing well on Amazon, and then approaching them to do the audiobook edition because the production is so expensive. And a lot of self-published authors aren't going to invest in that, especially if they don't think they're going to get very good visibility. And the ACX Audible deal isn't all that great, et cetera. So they have done so well, and they've only been growing. And the authors started to say, well, do you want to do my ebooks for me? Do you want to do my print books for me? And so they've become more of a what I would call like a full-fledged publisher, although I hesitate to say traditional because I think they have a more unusual way of working. And they're definitely targeting specific authors they want to work with. It's not like you can just go submit to them, as far as I know. You have to be already doing well and already have some credibility, but they're definitely doing things with authors and books that have never been on my radar. It feels like more of that could be coming, which I don't know. I mean, to me, it's maybe, again, a blessing and a curse, because does that mean in the future that everyone's going to have to kind of make their own success on some level to get a public, if they want a traditional publishing deal, can they get it? Do they first have to test the market themselves and prove out their concept or their book?
Yeah, it reminds me of another kind of out there idea I had when I was thinking about the blacklist, that instead of a platform like that they were proposing where people upload their manuscripts and they pay for these reviews, what if they did something that was more kind of crowdsourced on the model of Wattpad or something, where
Right.
people kind of voted up the manuscripts that they liked? And can you ever, that you could begin with something like that, where I don't know how many kind of Wattpad or serial fiction to mainstream deals there have been.
Oh, you've just led perfectly into the other phenomenon. It's kind of the flip side of that a little bit, that you do have Wattpad, Webtoon. I think those are the two biggest by far. There's also like fan fiction, archive of our own, where people have kind of put in the hours, put in the legwork, built an audience there, and then they transition at some point to something else. And certainly Wattpad has partnerships with all the big publishers and production studios. And there's like this pipeline of Wattpad to movie, or Wattpad to TV show, or Wattpad to traditional publishing deal. I think Anna Todd was one of the first. And she still works with Wattpad to this day. But it's a very particular type of work. Like, you're not going to find a literary novelist, at least I don't think, through Wattpad. It's fan fiction, fan fiction based, often genre fiction, and etc.
I mean, it's theoretically possible that, like with Substack or something, that more literary writers could develop an audience over time with the actual work.
Right.
The benefit that people in genres have, and this is something that's kind of shared by nonfiction, is that it's easier to describe what you're doing with a few words. And if you can do, and this is the problem that publishers, like when an editor is trying to sell a book to their sales staff, and then when the sales staff is trying to sell it to Amazon, it's like, in how little time can you say why someone should buy this? Literary fiction that depends on the quality of the sentences and the thinking and the
Yeah.
characters is the hardest to.
Do you think literary fiction will get tropes? It seems, I don't think that's going to happen, but it feels like they might need to have some
Well, the
tropes.
people who like it don't like it for reasons that are transportable in that way. Like, uh, I like books about a man who wakes up in the morning and is a bug. You know, get me more of those.
Okay. So that gives us a segue into the online creator or influencer who gets a book deal. I find this far more prevalent with nonfiction than with fiction, but it does happen with fiction as well. And here's one of the examples: Brooke Everick's Phoebe Berman's Gonna Lose It. She's a podcaster, a bookfluencer, a comedian. She doesn't even have a website, but she does have a pretty significant Instagram account that I was able to find. And there was another book deal kind of in that vein with someone known as the Mall Goth. This is a Substack, and this it has. I usually find with the online creators, there is, and usually that really pithy kind of one sentence pitch. So often high concept, or it obviously ties into whatever they're doing online. So here it's pitched as My Best Friend's Wedding meets Detransition Baby, in which a cosmopolitan trans woman returns home to Florida to be the best woman at her brother's wedding, um, et cetera, et cetera. So um, this wasn't a newsletter I had actually heard of. I don't know how sizable it is, but certainly I don't think the book is out yet. So we'll have to see how that translates into book sales. And then one more I just wanted to mention, I thought was a pretty interesting one. This is going a few years back. Um, it was a guy who, at the time the deal was announced, had a YouTube based podcast, and that led to his book deal for a mystery series. The second book in that series is now out. But if you go to his website and like look at his bio, like he has a really significant professional network. Like he used to be in the music industry. He was a performer, a songwriter. He produced records, Grammy nominated albums. And so I'm sure there were connections all the way around. Even if he didn't have the YouTube podcast, it feels like he probably wouldn't have had a hard time securing a deal. And I went through Publishers Marketplace just looking for the platforms right now that we often hear about or talk about, particularly TikTok. And this is just fiction. Again, I think it's important to kind of talk about those differently when we talk about online influencers. But you will find some TikTok creators in the mix, but not, to me, not that many. Like I can only find three um, that were fiction specific. And then I found one related to a podcast. This was Jenny Williamson, who does a podcast called Ancient History Fangirl, and her novel is set in the last days of the Roman Empire. So the setting matches the topic of the podcast, which makes sense. But and I feel like there's a lot of fear among fiction writers that all book deals in the future will just go to these online people. And I mean, I just feel like still it's still it's a, like in the chart, it's still a minor percentage. Obviously the big question is, will it grow? And I just don't know the answer.
Yeah,
So
I feel like the bigger worry is just that and maybe this is the part where you think that we disagree, because I tend to be kind of a doomsayer, and I think
yes,
your job is to encourage people, and I'm trying to make people change the system.
yes,
Other people, that uh, that we just have a system that, with these giant retailers, does not have room in it for the small and substantive deal and for the maintaining of a career over time.
yeah.
So, like, it may be that people who are online a lot kind of have a little bit more oomph in getting into that very small stream for the small and substantive deal. But to me, the big question that I kept asking people as I was kind of thinking about doing this with you and thinking about is who gets through that narrow door and why?
Yeah.
Who are those people in that big pink slice who have no obvious reason?
Yes. So that brings me to the seemingly unknown people. I say seemingly because I can't, so many factors can go into this. Although I did reach out to some authors for this session to ask them, how did you get your deal? Because I can't tell. So one example, Alison Lamoth, Dirty Metal. I couldn't even find a contact for her. Like I wanted to ask her this question, couldn't find a trace of her. Um, that deal was made within the last year. So in this unknown category, which was not insignificant, it was like a quarter of the deals. To me, it seems a cold query was likely. So they had been working on the craft or their manuscripts for some amount of time, and finally they got someone to say yes. So one of those people was Deborah Curtis, someone who is a professor. And I tried using the email I found for her through the university that she may still teach at, maybe not, hard to say. And it bounced back to me. So I don't think she works there anymore. Um, but you can see the story is a decade spanning debut in which a woman is torn between the love of her youth and the ornithologist husband who reawakened her desire and helped her live again. asking the question of whether someone can hold two great loves equally in their heart. I mean, in her bio, I can't see any particular literary community connections or like particular reason, like a leg up against anyone else. She just seems like someone who decided to write a novel towards the end of her professorial career. And I couldn't ask because I couldn't get a valid email. Anna McCallie is someone who works in the tech industry. She's based in London. And I was able to reach her, and it was a cold query, she said. Um, and then, oh, wait, no, I take that back. Anna specifically, she cold queried first, got a round of rejections from everyone she reached out to, but an invitation to submit again with her next book. She was on the verge of doing that with book number 2 when a friend, I don't know if this friend had an agent or a connection, the friend reached out and said, before you do that next round of queries, let me introduce you to my agent. And that agent signed her. So that brings me to Ruth, who doesn't have a website. The online presence I found for her is on Instagram. So I Instagram messaged her and I said, how'd you get your book deal? And she said it was a cold query. So I went to ask just to kind of confirm my gut instincts here that these people, didn't necessarily have anything else going for them other than a really strong story, which is I hope the encouraging part of this session, that it still happens. That said, we're talking about a really small number of book deals that this happens for. We're talking about hundreds of deals per year, at least those that I can see that get reported to Publishers Marketplace. And it's mainly agented deals, so it doesn't count the many smaller places that may be putting out novels that don't report. So I'll before we go to Q&A, and we'll probably go for another 10 minutes or so to take questions. Lee Stein, who's a novelist who also has a Substack called The Attention Economy, kind of gives you a sense of the sorts of things she talks about. She writes a lot about platform and the role of platform in having a successful career and reaching readers. And, she said, as Jane Friedman and others have written, novelists don't need a platform to sell their novel. However, and this is what you said, Anne, earlier, one day your publisher is going to say, sign into this portal and answer these 44 questions and tell us everyone you know in the media, academia, book selling, libraries, and social media. Who could blurb your book? How many subscribers does your newsletter have? Show us clips. They're going to ask for your Rolodex. And I think even if you don't necessarily need to have anything other than a great manuscript to bring to the table, once the book is on sale, the platform starts to matter a lot if you're going to get the readers or you're going to achieve the liftoff that helps you get the next book deal.
Yeah, and this is the thing that's really become very salient in the last 20 years or so. They have so many numbers, they have such like fine-grained information about sales that to get a deal that falls short, to undersell your book is just very, very professionally damaging. It's hard to keep a career going um, if you have a book that doesn't sell very well, which is part of why editors are and agent editors are reluctant to go out on a limb, and why the sales force is hard to convince. So they're always trying to aim for that sweet spot where you get enough of an advance that you know that they're going to commit resources and work on your book, but not so much that you're in danger of losing money for them and then you'll never be able to sell. Um, and so it makes it the being able to do this sales stuff on the other side is important for you, not just to sell your book, but to enable you to sell books further down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we're going to go to Q&A and look at some of the most upvoted questions. Before I do that, I just want to give a shout out to the next free session I'm going to be hosting. It's going to be on Valentine's Day, just by chance. It's a business clinic with writer Ariana Brown. We're going to talk about how to grow your freelance business without increasing social media. Yes, it can be done. And hopefully I will give you some tips on how through my discussion with her and the specifics of what she's doing. So I'm going to stop the share and we'll look at some Q&A. And Anne, certainly if you see a question in the Q&A you want to address, just let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to go with the most upvoted. Cheryl says, what if you're a private person and wish to maintain a certain amount of privacy about yourself and yet try to promote a book? And do you consider yourself a private person?
Yes. I don't, there's a certain number of people who just love doing this and relish it, but I think most readers and writers are not necessarily naturally inclined to self-promotion. It just puts that much more onus on you to find another way to uh, capture the attention of all the people you have to capture along the way. Um, you're much more, it's easier for you to get an agent if you have some sort of community, if there are people who might recommend you, if you've if you have like enough of a circle that you can get published in the literary magazine of that circle and you can add that, you know, and then once the agent is trying to pitch the book to publishers, they need to be able to point to your ability to sell the book and to reach out to other people. So sort of all along the way, it makes it harder for you the more you're not willing to be out there. Although there's no like one key, like I have 7 million Instagram followers, so I can write a book about anything I want. Is
Yeah. I think that sometimes people have this idea that to be successful, they'll have to uh, put out a lot of information about themselves, personal information that they don't want to disclose. But I don't think publishers or agents want to put you in that sort of uncomfortable position. They don't want you to bear it all, or talk about your family or your health problems or the embarrassing things that have happened to you. I don't think they're looking for that, but I do think they're looking for some sort of engagement with the community. And that, as you said, it can take a lot of different forms.
yeah,
I find that some of the private people I know will focus much more on their local or regional opportunities and connecting authors, and books and libraries. Like I know an author who started a speaking series in her town and used that to build relationships. So I think she just felt a little bit more control over what was happening, and she was more comfortable with these in-person engagements than trying to facilitate that same effect in an online environment. So I consider myself a private person, but I have this professional persona, obviously, that I put out there, and I'm comfortable talking about publishing in public.
and this is a kind of another piece of our times. Like as book reviewing went away, it got replaced by interviews with authors and profiles of authors. And even now, people read less in bookstores and talk more about themselves and answer questions. It is true that currently part of being a writer is that you're out there as a writer, not just, you're a
Mhm.
person. You need to kind of be out there as a person, but that's a little bit of a construct. That person can be whatever you decide that you want it to be, and it doesn't need to, they don't need to know about your divorces or your estranged children or whatever.
Yeah. There are definitely things I do not talk about with anybody, um, that only my husband knows, and it will stay that way.
It's just
Okay.
that it now, with this incredible accessibility that everyone has to you through electronic media, it's just a part of any sort of public life that you have to be prepared to be seen and figure out how you're going to handle that.
Mark wonders, this is a very pragmatic question, how long should you wait for an agent who has requested a full manuscript to respond? It's been 3 months, and I'm afraid if I follow up, it will prompt a quick rejection. But the agent did say she liked it and requested a full. Um, so I'll take first stab at this. Mark and anyone else who feels like they're in this situation where they might be ghosted at some point, I feel like it doesn't help you to keep waiting. I think you do need to check in and hopefully you have a sense, like maybe the agent expressed, you know, how long it would take them, whether that was 2 months or 2 weeks. But when you send them the manuscript, ask them when would be a reasonable time for me to check in. and then do it. They're not going to reject you because you checked in. It will be okay. But I do think there's the longer the more time that passes, the less likely they're going to do anything with it. There's just that's just the way it goes. If they were very excited and enthusiastic, hopefully they would have read it all and gotten back to you within a reasonable time frame. That's going to vary by agent, but I would say if it's been 1 to 2 months and there's still nothing, I personally would move on. I would not want to sit around waiting for something that increasingly is likely to be a no, thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know what the outer limit is, and it probably varies by agent. Um, but I am hearing from a lot of people that they're waiting longer than they
Yeah,
were.
yeah, I hear that too. And there's so little that can be done other than checking in and deciding when to move on. Um, Marilyn wonders what I think of Query Marketplace. It's a relatively new model to bring writers and agents together. I actually haven't heard of this one. Have you, Anne?
No, I haven't.
I would probably think the same thing about that as I do, like at the beginning of this session, we talked about Blacklist and the many efforts that have been made over time to match up agents or publishers with authors. And I have not seen a single one really prove out in a way that was meaningful, where meaning I would actually send people there and say, try this. I just don't think they work. And I'm not saying that particular business is a scam or that it's not worthwhile. I'm just saying these models don't prove out, and maybe this one will prove me wrong, but I'm willing to go out on a limb and say it will not.
I think, as far as I can hear, agents are so overwhelmed with material that they're not looking for more places to find
Yeah,
stuff from people who aren't even motivated to find them.
exactly that. Kathleen asks, in addition to the platform or lack thereof element, do you think other factors play into the picture, like the author's age, appearance, their backstory? So, are there other selling points that an agent may be thinking about and evaluating how they might market the author or the novel? And here, Anne, I'm curious to get your take on this. I hear overwhelmingly from people that they feel like their age is working against them if they're beyond a certain age. Um, I'll let you go first.
I don't know that to be true. I mean, I think it is certain people manage to find success and to make a career out of being, a bright young thing who has a look or who has a style and captures attention. That's a thing that works, but if you're these people want books that are going to sell. They want it. Now, a thing that really does work against you is if you've published a bunch of books and I mean, there, there's an advantage to being young, which is that people are always looking for the next big seller. And
Right,
the young person coming in seems like a more, they're rolling the dice.
right.
They do, definitely, there's a sort of a more open door in search of that person.
Yes.
Uh, but it's not because they're young, it's just because they're at the beginning.
Yeah, I can always find certainly examples of people who've had their debut past a certain age. During this presentation, I mentioned Deborah Curtis. She's clearly not young anymore. She's at the end of her career, now starting a fiction writing career. We'll see how long it goes. Long may she continue. One of my close friends when I lived in Charlottesville was Martha Woodruff. Sadly, she's passed, but she got her first book deal at the age of 69. If you would talk to her, and actually, I did an interview with her that you can go find on my YouTube channel. She says, as delightful and charming and full of life as any person. I challenge you to find a 20-year-old with as much energy as Martha in that interview or any other place that you would have found her. So I think it's more about what's your attitude. Are you going to collaborate? Is the work that you're writing actually in conversation with other books that are out there or with other authors? I think one of the issues that can hold people of a certain age back is that maybe they've been working on the same manuscript for so long. I've seen people work on manuscripts for 20 plus years. Some of the ideas or inspirations come from a different time. And so their work has lost resonance for 2025 or whenever. And it just shows in the query. It's not so much about their age, but the relevance or the resonance of the ideas in the book. Bonnie Garmis, Lessons in Chemistry. She's in her 60s. So I think you can find plenty of examples that the industry can be open. I really, this is where I think I tend to be optimistic, but people don't believe me. I think that publishing is one of the few industries where no one has to see you. They don't necessarily have to know your age. They can make a decision just based on what they read. But yeah, maybe I'm a little more optimistic than I should be.
I think,
Okay.
if you have been trying to publish a book your whole life and you're 65 and you know it's not so much that the agent is going to say this person is 65. It's that it's not on their end. The problem is you have not yet produced the thing that's going to sell.
Yeah.
And maybe you need to, I mean, if you've been submitting all of this time, maybe you need to try something different or
Yeah. Okay, we're going to make this the last question. I think it's an appropriate one given the topic today. Lauren says, I keep hearing that there's a contrarian movement growing wherein the author does not build out their social media and deliberately stays a little mysterious, thus building interest. Is this a myth or does it only apply to published authors? I have not heard of this contrarian movement yet. But I definitely understand the mystique piece. And I understand certain authors, especially in the literary community, who do want to retain that, not just the privacy, but this air of mystery around who they are. And but it kind of only works if you've already achieved some level of success. It seems to me. What do you
I think it
think?
would be a super big gamble to go in
Yeah.
and say, I'm not going to tell you anything about myself because I think the air of mystery is going to work for me. Um, I think generally speaking, as we were saying before about the questionnaire and stuff, they're looking for ways for you to make connections with people and to broaden the circle of this book. And to the extent to which you're not going to do that, it's a bigger lift for you and for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So you need to really make that mystery thing look like it's going to work, or I think that it will just seem skeptical
Yeah.
or skepticism.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. I certainly had a lot of fun planning it with Anne, and thank you, Anne, for joining me for this and
Thank
being
you.
up
It's
for
such a
it.
pleasure for me to talk about this stuff. I find it, in Book Post, I'm just really kind of mesmerized by this issue of how we're going to keep writing and literature going when the kind of the mechanics of it are changing so
Yeah,
fast. And I think you're
absolutely.
right. Like, even though I maybe have a more pessimistic look at the end, we both see it happening. It's,
Yeah,
that people continue to want the same joys from reading.
they do. We can take hope from that. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely weekend, and I hope to see you again soon.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.